Hi, I'm Michelle Aronson, and this is True Stories at Work, a podcast where we discuss the best things about working in human resources. The people, the stories, and the things that happen at work that we didn't even know about. Workplace confessions. Today, you get to meet Dina, who is an executive coach and former HR pro who aspired to work abroad. What she didn't expect were language and cultural barriers, especially when everyone was speaking English.
And I realized I needed to go get some new work trousers. And I didn't know the stores there. And so instead of saying trousers, I made the mistake of asking a very junior staff, where do you get your pants? And she looked at me like, pardon me? And I said, your pants. Like, you have like pants you use at home, but you have pants for work. And I can't remember who set me straight, but they were like, hey, pants means underwear. This woman thinks you're asking her, where she buys her underwear, the underwear she uses for work.
Dina also shares her unique approach to handling a job you don't like. It's called quitting.
When you are no longer welcome, or when somebody, for whatever reason, is just not seeing the value in your work, yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can handle it, but sometimes you can just move on to the next thing because I believe in abundance and there are so many opportunities available.
And you'll hear how she balanced the financial risk of leaving with the personal cost of staying.
My financial security was on the line. So in some ways, I also looked at it like, yes, my financial security is on the line. So I want to make a move before things get bad so that wherever I interview, however I show up is the best of me and not some like beaten down version of me that's lacking confidence or dealing with some kind of trauma, toxicity at work.
And today's workplace confession happens in the parking garage, which some people don't think of as an exciting location, but I disagree. So let's get started. I'm so glad to have you on my show. Welcome to the podcast. We met at a coaching retreat, and I remember we started sharing HR stories right away. So I'd love for you to just take a minute and tell me a little bit more about how you started in HR.
So I'm currently an executive coach and a facilitator, but really my roots are in HR. I have a background working as a HR BP and in some learning and development roles, and lastly, as a diversity leader. I started my career in HR in college. So I got my first job from a staffing agency. I had no clue what HR was. And I was placed in a role that ended up becoming a bit of my first professional home.
Yeah, that's great. An early exposure to what HR could be, I
Mhm.
imagine. Tell me a little bit about where did you grow up and what was that like?
I'm from Southern New Jersey, and I grew up in a town that's not too far from Philadelphia. And my mom worked in a sort of finance mortgage role. And so I had this image of what I thought like business was and professional life was because I could see my mom going to work every day. And I knew pretty quickly that I wanted to also work in an office as a kid, but I didn't know doing what. So I was raised in a very close knit community, I'd say. Parents immigrated to the US from Italy. So my mom was a little bit anomalous because, yes, women worked where I grew up, but they didn't always have the kind of roles my mom had. My mom had risen pretty quickly to very senior roles. And so I had a pretty incredible role model growing up.
That's incredible for that time to have a mother in business in that way. So,
Mhm.
when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was really little, I wanted to be a hairdresser or a garbage truck worker. That's what I called it. I didn't know the word sanitation worker, but I thought it was pretty cool that they got to ride the back of the trucks. So I do remember telling my parents that's what I wanted to do. And then I had this image and kind of role model in my mom. And then as I was really, growing up and becoming my own person, I knew I wanted to work in an office, but I was also so fascinated by humans and their behavior and why people do what they do. So for a while, I was like, I want to be a psychologist. And interestingly, I know the term business psychologist exists now. It's very prevalent in the UK and in Ireland, but we don't really use that term as much here. But I didn't know that as a kid, that that was something I could do. So I think I had the early inkling that I knew I wanted to work with people and I wanted to work in business. I just didn't know what it was called.
Yeah. Had we known then what we know now, we would be in probably the same careers.
Probably.
We had to figure it out the hard way. So then how did you end up in HR?
My freshman year of college, I needed a job. And I went to this staffing agency in my area. And the owner of the agency was this very, I guess you could just say, like, she was a character. And we got chatting right away about what I was looking for. And she just kind of looked at me like, squinted her eyes. She's like, I like you. I'm gonna put you with my niece. And her niece was the HR manager or director. I'm not even sure at this point what her level was of a company that was a manufacturing company that did circuit boards, and they needed an HR assistant. And I went in as a temp and then pretty soon got hired. And it was my first exposure to HR. I had seen HR before in high school jobs when I worked at Kmart at the pharmacy. I knew what personnel was, but I didn't really know what else HR could do besides like payroll and, disciplining people. I didn't really know the business side of things. So that job kind of laid my foundation for HR.
What surprised you about what you experienced in your early career there?
Oof. Okay. What surprised me was the variance of people that I would be exposed to in one day and the variety of issues that would come to the table. Because it was a manufacturing environment, you had all different skill levels and people from so many different backgrounds, which was really cool that I'd be like chatting with a hand solderer and then, the chief engineer would come into our office. It was just neat, to be exposed to so many different people and their problems, their issues. And what really surprised me is that there would be somebody coming in with a really simple question that would be like a, I don't know, 10-minute conversation and off they went. And then somebody else would walk in with something and it was like, okay, everybody drop what we're doing. Bit of a doozy, all hands on deck. We've got an issue. I thought that was kind of fascinating actually and surprising.
It's such a variety and a catch-all, like, things end up there
Yeah.
that shouldn't be there. I mean, I
Yes.
remember thinking, "Why am I in charge of this? Does nobody else know how to solve problems in my
Mhm.
company?" That everything that's unknown sort of ended up in our department.
So true.
So, tell me a little bit about the challenges you had to deal with, maybe the greatest challenge you had working in HR?
Hmm. Well, there were so many chapters of my HR career. So I worked for a professional services company, which had global offices, and I was able to make an international transfer to their London office. I had personal reasons that needed to bring my life to London, but also just this personal and professional desire to work abroad. I'd always wanted to work abroad. So London just felt like, okay, they speak English. It's so close to all these places that I want to spend time in. This is going to be great. And like, it's so easy to go London, New York. I was living in New York at the time. And I would say the biggest challenge I had was twofold. I underestimated the cultural difference despite speaking the same language. Some might argue we don't speak the same language. And I was ill prepared for those differences in the way that I would communicate, the way that I would approach situations. And also because I work in HR and people are my work, that I would need to kind of shift and alter the way I communicate. That was big. But also, this department within this organization was essentially changing the way that the HR function operated, and it was painful, and it was difficult, and they gave me a really big remit and a really big and challenging, client group, and I had individuals on my team. I was managing maybe 3 or 4 people. One was really I had the toughest clients, the partners that I was dealing with were difficult, and so throw all that together. Wow, what a time. What a time.
It is interesting that you said you spoke the same language, but felt that there was really a significant gap
Yeah,
between what you were intending and maybe how it was landing. Do you
yeah.
have a story that you could share that would sort of demonstrate what you were experiencing?
Yeah, I want to preface this with I have the deepest respect for people who come to the US or who go to other countries to work. I just have such respect for people who do this. It is so vulnerable, it is so brave, it is so challenging. So when I think about me struggling, I'm like, I was speaking my own language, but culturally I came from New York. And at that time in New York, the way we were kind of groomed was to be very assertive, some might say aggressive, speaking very directly, very fast, with a different energy. Like, I can step into that really quickly. And that was kind of how I operated. And it worked really well for me in New York. I had always kind of done very well in my roles. So I had this very naive assumption that it was going to be the same in the UK. And the biggest challenge I had was really just the way that I connected with people and the way that I spoke, and I needed to change not just the tone of voice, but also like the kinds of questions I would ask. I had this one woman who was more junior to me, and I was getting trying to get to know her. And I was just asking some like really nice open-ended questions. And at one point she just kind of like looked at me like if she could have clutched her pearls and grabbed her little cardigan, she would have. Like, and then she looked at me and she's like, "You're asking me a lot of personal questions." And I went, "I am. I'm so sorry." And she said, "We don't, like you need basically like give it a second, like calm down, and back off a little bit." And I was like, "Oh, okay." The other big misstep I made was I finally was meeting my boss, and I had been talking to her virtually. And now this was 2009, and so setting up a video conference with somebody in London, we had the IT team there. It was a big deal that I had this video interview. It was called a video interview. And so to meet her in person, I was so excited. And I walked in the office and I ran up to hug her, and I could feel her body going like really tight. And I was like, "Oh gosh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just came on too strong."
Yeah. Like you said, there's subtle things and behavioral things and just ways that we operate that
Mhm.
are not maybe translated. And it probably is that you do feel like you speak the language and you're going to go over there and rock it, and you still have to learn.
Yes, yes. And another funny one, I asked one of the staff, we were like maybe a week into working together, and I still had all of my clothes that were coming in a shipment. It was going to take another 6 weeks. So I only had maybe a suitcase worth of clothing. And I realized I needed to go get some new work trousers. And I didn't know the stores there. And so instead of saying trousers, I made the mistake of asking a very junior staff, "Where do you get your pants?" And she looked at me like, "Pardon me?" And I said, "Your pants. Like, you have like pants you use at home, but you have pants for work." And she just looked bewildered, like, what is she on about? And I can't remember who set me straight, but they were like, "Hey, pants means underwear. This woman thinks you're asking her, where she buys her underwear, the underwear she uses for work." And so, you
And
know,
I like how you have a couple of different pairs of underwear. The pants you wear to work and the pants you wear at home.
your pants at home, your pants in the office, like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, there were definitely these like kind of silly things that happened. And the other thing too is this was a while ago, and the world has changed. This was 15 years ago, more than that. And I do think that things are more casual now in the industry that I worked in. For example, they wear jeans now, and, remote work is really normalized. And so I don't know. I do think there's a bit of a generational thing too. It was a different time.
Mhm. It's a great experience too, going abroad, and it just sounds like, from what you said, there were cultural differences and also maybe not the cultural onboarding that people need when they're traveling abroad, even to a place that feels familiar, you know? So
100%.
tell me a story, maybe what is the scariest thing you had to face in your HR roles?
I would say my diversity leader role. So I was moving back from London. and I was coming back to work in the United States. I took a role in the Houston office for my organization. But I knew going to Texas was going to be really intimidating and challenging, A, because I didn't spend any professional time there. And two, it was my first DEI role. And I think it was scary for me, to be honest. I knew that I was up for it. I knew I had prepared for it. Now this was my first formal role. And it was scary for the first few months, but really it was the coolest job I've ever had in corporate. It was the
Hmm.
best. I loved it. I loved the people. I loved the work. I actually loved where I lived. I didn't expect Houston to be as diverse as it was, and I really thrived in that role. So this thing that was the scariest ended up being the coolest I've ever had in terms of a corporate role.
Your journey into sort of cultural adaptation was New York, London, Texas. I can't envision such diversity in
Yeah.
all they speak the same language, but, like, just culturally feels pretty dramatic.
Yes, the US is big, and depending on where you are, I think the US feels different. I'm currently based in Seattle, well, the suburbs of Seattle, and it's really different here than it is in other places I've lived.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. That's one of the things that makes the US interesting. So tell me about a moment in your career that really changed you.
Mm. It happened earlier in my career before the professional services role. I was in media and I'd had a really good run. I had these leaders that I worked with that they really felt like family to me. They were just all the things you should be. Like they were supportive, they were encouraging, they were tough, they demanded. They gave me stretch opportunities and they just saw the gifts in me that I sometimes couldn't see. So here I am like riding these waves of like, oh my gosh, I found the kind of work that I want to do. I've got amazing people who just see things in me that even I'm not seeing. And yeah, the work's challenging, but it's super exciting. And so I got a promotion. It was my first promotion into a managerial role. And it was a step up and it was very big. It was exciting. It meant that I went into another division and I had to report to somebody else. So this woman interviewed me. She knew of me. She hired me. And it was apparent pretty quickly that she just didn't like me. I'm not sure if I liked or disliked her. I don't even think I had enough time to determine what my perspective was. I just knew that there was a friction that turned into a dislike. And I was very keen to do a good job. I had always been not like an it girl, but I'd always had like a really good reputation. And, it just things always went so well. And I worked really hard. And it didn't matter how hard I worked. It didn't matter which approach I took with this individual. It was obvious she didn't like me. And I quickly realized that I was going to need to find a new job. There was no threat of my role. Like she'd never told me that I was, under any kind of performance review. It was nothing like that. It was just this feeling of like, wow, if I stay, I'm going to feel my confidence take a hit. I'm going to turn myself into a pretzel. Nothing is going to matter. And I don't wanna live like that, and I don't wanna work like that. So, I took the situation into my own hands, and I started working with a recruiter, and I quickly landed the job in professional services, which really changed my life. We were so supportive of each other, and I'm so grateful that she was a nasty boss because I wouldn't have probably wanted to leave. I had been in that organization 4 or 5 years. It felt like a professional home, and it was a big deal to leave, but I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I did. I think the big takeaway is when you are no longer welcome or when somebody, for whatever reason, is just not seeing the value in your work. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can handle it, but sometimes you can just move on to the next thing because I believe in abundance and there are so many opportunities available for people, at least here in the US, I did feel that, and I was in New York, so I was, in a position to be able to do that. I didn't have a family, that I was taking care of at that time, so I recognized the privilege of where I was, but I also realized that sometimes people just stay. They stay longer than they should.
Mhm, and then they're unhappy, and they're staying because they're comfortable or afraid, or I don't know, there's probably, as many different reasons people stay as the
Mhm.
people that are staying. That's really I think that's brave. I mean, that sounds really brave to
Thank
just
you. It felt brave. I didn't come from an environment where, if I made a mistake financially, I would have the kind of support from my parents to pay my rent, or I didn't have a roommate at the time. I lived alone. And, you know, my financial security was on the line. So in some ways, I also looked at it like, yes, my financial security is on the line. So I want to make a move before things get bad,
Mhm.
so that
Mhm.
wherever I interview, however I show up is the best of me and not some like beaten down version of me that's lacking confidence or dealing with some kind of trauma, toxicity at work. I just wanted to show the real me, and I could see it was coming. And so, really listening to myself, paying attention to what was going on around me, and then empowering myself to go change it not only removed me from a situation that was not going to improve, but also put me in a position of total empowerment because I ended up landing in such a great team.
Mhm. Mhm. There's always something better ahead, you know? I mean, I really
Yeah.
believe there's a lot of good opportunities. I would like to make this a PSA for all of my friends, and you know who you are. About a half dozen of them are thinking, "Is it for me?" And yes, it is. Go find a new job, people,
Mhm. It's
because
it's a p it's doable. So it didn't go well, but it really birthed a whole new life for me because I got to work in a different organization in the UK, and I got to work in my field, and I got to study for my, coaching certification, which really created the pathway to what I do now.
Mhm.
So it's like this common thread, from every difficult situation, there really, if you are willing to see it in that way, it really does create the next thing, and it's always better.
What your story reminds me is sometimes when you get to the goal, it isn't really what you had hoped for or expected. And there's so many examples of that in my own life or in the stories that I hear from people that I work with. And, you get there and you think, oh, now what? Or
Yeah.
now I've got it, but I don't really necessarily love it. So
Yeah.
what is next? So let me ask you in terms of HR stories. So, what is something maybe funny or surprising that you experienced when you were working in HR?
Mm. There's always the funnies. There's just days where you're like, "I cannot believe this happened." But one of the kinda craziest things I dealt with was a investigation that I was not spearheading, but I was pulled into, of a very senior person on my team that I was looking after. So the sort of backdrop is I worked in professional services. It was a partnership, and it was everybody's dream to get to the partnership. And so the individual was she was the company person. She said yes to everything. She rarely took time off. Technically sound. The client, a very, very prestigious client, loved her. Individuals liked working with her. They thought she was a little nutty sometimes, but in general, people just really liked her. And so I was responsible as the HR VP for that group of putting together the portfolio for the partnership process. And I was almost close to the end. I thought for sure this individual, she's a shoe in, it's going to happen. It had the support of everyone. And I got a call from the office of partnership or whatever. And they said, Dina, we need you to come to our office on the blah, blah, blah floor right away. I want you to drop everything you're doing. Do not tell anybody where you're going and come upstairs. And so I went up, we had a chat, and they said, this individual, let's just call her Mary. We are investigating Mary for fraud. And I was definitely taken aback. And there was just no smiles, no funnies. It was very serious. We think that this individual, like Mary's impersonating another person. Mary does not actually have a qualification that is needed, like this legal qualification that's needed to do this body of work. And so here's what we need from you. And then suddenly I was embroiled in this like investigation and not allowed to talk to anybody about it. And so people were asking me after a few days, like, where do you keep going? Like, what are you doing? What's happening? And I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. And then when all of this came out, it was very obvious that I had been involved in that. But I felt like wow, like, I don't know how people work undercover and I don't, and, just keeping a straight face. And so I had like my job and my personal life and all these things that I was doing. And then investigation, which in a 2-week period just took over my life. It was wild. And the really strange thing about this individual is that she was, really always buttoned up and very professional, like never wore a color, never wore she wore like black and gray, black and gray. I don't even think I ever saw navy.
Hmm.
And the managing partner and I were debriefing after the investigation meeting with her was in place. And I believe there were authorities involved. And he said it was the strangest thing. She showed up to the meeting with a big pink bow on her shirt. It was, and she was also newly pregnant, and he said it was like she went out of her way to find the most garish, like, maternity shirt to kind of soften her image, and he said, "I just couldn't take it seriously, it was so bizarre." And anyway, it was one of the strangest things I've dealt with, and it was definitely funny in the end, but in the moment, I thought, "Wow," you think you think things are trending one way, and there's always some other story happening. And there were times, I don't know if you ever dealt with this, where I had more than one instance in my first company where I got a call from the head of HR, and it was like, "Dina, somebody from the FBI is at the front desk and you need to escort them to this office and you need to they're going to watch you take a document out to make sure that like you don't do anything to the document." So I would say investigations always were like, wow, you know,
What? That never happened? We did have the FBI show up, but not to watch me do something. What document are they watching you take out? What did they wanna
I
see?
can't remember. It was definitely not like an I-9. It was something in the employee file,
Hmm.
because remember in the days when we had like employee
Yeah.
files?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to the file room. So the FBI, it was so funny. My parents and my little brother, who was like 9 at the time, were visiting from Florida, waiting in the lobby for me to go to lunch. And then suddenly, like, these agents showed up and they see me walking with the FBI. They were like, "What do you do? I thought you were like an assistant." And anyway, they were very kind, but they said, "We need to observe everything that you do. Don't touch, anything, like, don't touch anything but this document. We need you to go to
Hmm.
this person's file. We need you to pull out the whatever document and hand it to us." And so, like, I almost felt like hands up, like, I'm not touching anything. Yeah, so investigations always just piqued my interest. Is like, "Well, that's interesting." I mean, there's,
Yeah.
like, all these crazy stuff, like telling people they can't, wear tank tops that, like, show their midriff, or like, "Hey, you have a hygiene issue." Like, oh my gosh, all of those things are always awful and difficult, but I found investigations to be the most crazy stuff.
Yeah. When you were talking about the one where you got the phone call and they said, "Come over here right away. Don't tell anybody where you're going." My boss called me once, and it was the longest walk to his office because
Yes.
he had never spoken to me in that tone before, and I was thinking, am I getting fired?" And, like, my whole brain on the way over there was thinking, "Did I do something? What have I done lately? Did I screw something up?" All right. Anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share?
Well, I just want to make a comment about people who currently work in HR. I think it is a really difficult field. I have a lot of respect for my HR colleagues. And I just think we need to throw a little love to HR people because they had to navigate managing workforces in an unprecedented moment. And they probably all need some TLC at this point.
We love HR. We love
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Um, any questions for me before we wrap?
Yeah. When you think about the podcast interviews you've had so far, what is the sort of like overarching pattern or theme that you see in the kind of people you have conversations with?
Hmm. From what I've gathered, the people that I talk to care very deeply about the work they do. They care about being kind. They care about the companies they work for and
Mhm.
really work hard to balance that because it's really hard at times when you're making hard business decisions and you also want to really care for the people that are working with you. So, um, the people I speak to are elevating the profession. And the other thread is how people ended up in HR. You might be the winner so far for somebody kind of starting early,
Mm,
because it was when you were in college, but a lot of people didn't ever know about it. And so that's
mm,
a bit of a universal thread is I think many of the people I'm speaking to just kind of end up there and also really, really love it. And
mm.
it's really hard work,
Yes,
as you
all
mentioned.
those things.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thanks for being on the show. I'm super grateful.
Thanks for having me.
We've all done something bad at work, but here's your chance to confess. From small wrongs like borrowing office supplies to simplify your back to school shopping or snacking on a coworker's lunch, to the major workplace sins, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll type. Here is today's conscious clearing confession.
Parking garages can seem like a sleepy, dusty place where people just come and go from work. But to me, they're ripe with story and action and intrigue. From a 90-year-old man with a walker coming to slash his ex-girlfriend's tires, to people petitioning speed bumps and sending email chains through the organization to remove the speed bumps that are put in place to protect so many. My workplace confession begins in the parking garage, where you get to hold people captive for one time in your life. So I had been driving to work and my back window was dirty, and I went to turn on the rear wiper with the fluid to clean it up. And I noticed, I guess the little tube that connects the wiper to the juice was disconnected and it was just squirting straight out the back. And I thought, oh my God, when I get to work, I have to see if I can plug that in or maybe I have to take it to the dealership. Honestly, I wasn't sure, but I knew it had to be investigated. Well, I was driving out later that day and I noticed that my boss was behind me, my poor boss. And I realized he couldn't get around me because we were in the parking garage. And he was living about an hour and a half from the office. So he carpooled with somebody else. And I was just so excited that there was going to be a witness to my grand scheme. I stopped and I could tell that he was curious and a little bit annoyed. And then I let him have it. I turned on my rear view wiper fluid and it just shot straight out like a water hose onto the front of his car. And he was shocked and I was laughing. And then I drove away. And then he yelled at me the next day, but it was worth it. Thanks for listening to the show. If you work in HR and have a story to share, please visit my website, cultureandstrategylab.com/podcast. Stories are what we remember and how we connect, so please share yours with me. Thanks. Haiku for Dina. Dina's pants are not in a bunch because she's moved on to the next big thing.